Brother laughed. You'll always be our servant. He didn't know I was his new CO hut. If everything you thought you knew about your place in the world, your family, and your worth was about to change in a single moment. Hey, my name is Bailey. Bailey. Evans had always been the quiet one, the one who kept her head down, who smiled politely to the rich patrons who filled the upscale restaurant she worked at. Every day, she served CEOs, actors, and moguls, the kind of people who lived lives of luxury that seemed impossible to touch. But no matter how she tried to blend into the background, she couldn't shake the constant feeling of being invisible. It wasn't the kind of invisibility that gave her peace. It was the kind that made her feel like a ghost, an outsider in a world that wasn't meant for her. Her brother, James, had always rubbed her face in it. The golden child of the family, his success seemed effortless. He was always the one who got the praise, the one who had the future handed to him, while Bailey was stuck in the never-ending grind of surviving. She had grown used to the hurtful words, the patronizing attitude, the constant reminder from James that she would always be nothing more than a servant, always working for others, never achieving anything for herself. You'll always be our servant, he would say with a laugh. It was his favorite line, the one he used to remind Bailey of her place in the world. And every time he said it, it dug deeper into her soul. He never saw her for who she was, her intelligence, her ambition, her potential. He saw her as someone who would always be beneath him, always serving, always waiting. The worst part was that she had started to believe him. She hadn't known any other life. The abuse from her ex-husband, the financial struggles, the late nights spent working double shifts, this was her reality. All she had was her children, Sophia and Alex, who were the light of her life. They were her reason to keep going, to keep believing that there had to be more out there for them. But the restaurant, with its pristine decor and its glittering clientele, was a reminder of everything she didn't have. As she poured a glass of wine for a powerful-looking man seated at a table, her thoughts drifted back to James. He was so sure of his place in the world, always the one everyone looked to for answers. And then there was Bailey, always in the background, always out of the spotlight, always just a waitress. As she walked back to the kitchen, a familiar voice called out. It was James, sitting at a table with a group of friends, his loud laugh echoing through the restaurant. His friends were laughing with him, sharing stories of his latest business ventures, all of them in awe of his success. Bailey swallowed the bitterness that rose in her throat. James caught her eye and smiled mockingly. Hey, Bailey, he called out. Still serving the rich and famous, huh? You'll always be our servant. The others laughed along with him, but to Bailey, it felt like the entire room was laughing at her. The words stung, but it wasn't the first time he'd said them. Still, the weight of them crushed her spirit. She was used to it, used to being belittled and dismissed by him. But for some reason, tonight, the words landed differently. Something inside her stirred, a quiet rage that she had kept buried for so long. She turned away, refusing to let him see the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. As she walked to the kitchen, she felt a strange sense of determination. This was the last time she would let him, or anyone else, define her. She was done being invisible. She was done being the one who had to serve and never be served. Bailey knew she had something more to offer than the role she had been stuck in for so long. That night, after she finished her shift, she stood in front of the mirror in the employee locker room. She didn't see the tired, overworked woman who had spent years living under the shadow of her brother's success. She saw someone who was ready for change, ready to take control. But as she wiped the tears away and straightened her uniform, the question lingered in her mind. What would it take for her to change everything? Would she continue to stay silent, or would she finally do something to break free? Bailey had learned from an early age that life wasn't about fairness, it was about survival. Her mother had been a dreamer, always hoping for something better, but the reality of their situation left them constantly on the edge. Her father had worked hard, but the world never seemed to give them enough to get ahead. They had been stuck in the same cycle for years, just surviving. But it was her brother who had always been the one to get everything handed to him. James had been the favorite, always getting the best clothes, the best opportunities, the brightest future, and Bailey had been stuck in the background, watching him get everything she ever wanted. It wasn't just the material things. It was the love, the attention, the validation. Bailey never got those things. Instead, she got the burden of trying to keep everything together when her parents couldn't. When she was a teenager, her father had lost his job at the factory, and their financial situation had gone from bad to worse. It was then that James had decided to leave, to escape. "I'm not staying here in this mess," he had said, packing his bags and leaving without a second thought. Bailey, on the other hand, stayed behind to help care for their sick mother. To keep the house from falling apart, she became the caretaker, the one who had to hold everything together while James lived his life in comfort and success. Over the years, the emotional scars from that time had stayed with her, like a permanent stain on her soul. Every time her brother called and made a passing comment about how hard things were for him, Bailey felt that familiar stab of anger. He didn't know what it was like to truly struggle. He didn't know what it was like to watch your dreams slip away while you fought just to make it through another day. But the hardest part was the betrayal she felt from her own family. It wasn't just the neglect, it was the fact that they had all treated her as if she was invisible. She was never good enough in their eyes. She was the one who had to take care of everything while they went on with their lives. It was as if she was always expected to sacrifice herself for the family, but never given the love or appreciation in return. And now, as she stood in front of the mirror, reflecting on everything she had endured, Bailey realized just how much she had allowed herself to be defined by others, how much she had allowed her brother's taunts, her family's indifference, and the weight of her own guilt to keep her small. But tonight was different. Bailey was tired of being the one who sacrificed. She was tired of being the one who was overlooked, who was dismissed. She was ready to confront those hidden wounds, the ones that had shaped her life and kept her from stepping into her own power. It was time to stop hiding and start living on her own terms. The following days after the dinner with James were a whirlwind of thoughts, questions, and sleepless nights. Bailey couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation that had settled in her chest, nor the faint spark of something else, a flicker of hope, of possibility. She couldn't continue to live under the weight of her family's expectations or be tethered to the past. As much as she wanted to pretend she was fine, she knew deep down that something inside her had snapped. She was done with feeling small, done with being invisible, done with waiting for someone to give her permission to live a different life. It wasn't the first time Bailey had thought about changing her life. She had spent countless nights dreaming of something better for herself and her children. She wanted to give them a future free from the constant cycle of struggle she had lived through. But what would it take to break free from the chains of her past? What would it take to take control and own her future? The answer came in a simple, unexpected form. A few days later, as Bailey arrived for her shift at the restaurant, she was met with an unexpected phone call. It was Graham Hafford, the CEO she had served that night. Her heart skipped a beat. She had forgotten about the note she had slipped him, the small act of rebellion that now felt like a distant memory. But Graham had called, and his voice over the phone was steady and confident. "Bailey, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow," he said, his tone measured. "There's something about you, your poise, your intelligence that stands out. I think you have the qualities I'm looking for in a leader. Let's talk." Bailey felt her stomach twist. She didn't know what to make of it, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that this might be the chance she'd been waiting for. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a woman with a purpose. But what if she failed? What if she wasn't good enough for the world Graham was offering? The doubt crept in, the familiar voice of insecurity telling her she didn't belong in that world. But that voice was the same one that had told her she wasn't good enough for her family, that had told her she'd never escape the shadow of James's ridicule. Bailey had spent too long listening to that voice. She was done. The next day, she walked into the sleek corporate office of Hafford Enterprises, the kind of place she had only ever dreamed of. The polished floors, the glass walls, the sharp-suited professionals rushing around, all of it seemed so far removed from the world she knew. But when Graham greeted her, he didn't treat her like a waitress. He didn't see her as small or insignificant. He saw her as someone who had potential, someone who could make a difference. "I'm looking for a partner," Graham said, his eyes steady. "Someone with vision, someone who can help me turn this company around. You've got the instincts I need. I want you to help lead my company." Bailey felt the weight of his words settle over her. This wasn't just an offer. This was her chance to prove herself. She had spent years working in the background, making others feel powerful. But now she was being given the opportunity to take control. For the first time in her life, Bailey realized she didn't have to wait for anyone to tell her she was worthy. She was worthy already. As she left Graham's office, the weight of what she had just agreed to settled in. This wasn't just about business. This was about rewriting her story, about stepping into a life where she called the shots, where she made the rules. But with that freedom came responsibility. The stakes were high. The corporate world wasn't kind to women like her, and she knew that. She had a family to think about: Sophia, Alex, and even the memory of her broken marriage. What would this new life mean for them? That night, she sat in the quiet of her apartment, staring at her reflection in the window. She thought about her children, their bright eyes filled with hope. She thought about the life she wanted to give them. She thought about her brother, James, and the weight of his dismissive words. Would she ever be able to escape the scars he had left on her? Would she be able to rise above the life he had set out for her? But she knew one thing for sure. This was her chance to finally choose her own path. The fear was there, but so was something else: empowerment. She was no longer willing to let fear dictate her life. She wasn't going to be James's servant anymore, or anyone's. It was time to take control, to step into the role she was meant to play. And so, as Bailey lay in bed that night, the decision became clear. She would take the opportunity. She would rise, not just for herself, but for Sophia, for Alex. She would show them that no matter where you come from, no matter how many people try to hold you back, you can always find a way to stand tall. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter. Her chapter. Bailey had always been the type to keep her emotions under wraps. Life had taught her to be resilient, to push through hardship without letting anyone see her struggle. But this was different. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about making sure that she never had to stand in the shadows again. This was her moment. But if she was going to take control of her life, she had to do it right. The excitement of Graham's offer hadn't fully settled when the gravity of the situation hit her. She wasn't just walking into a role where she would be treated with respect and equal footing. She was stepping into a world of corporate power and manipulation. A world where everyone had something to gain and some had everything to lose. She was going to have to navigate these waters carefully, or risk losing everything before she even had a chance to gain it. Bailey sat in the quiet of her apartment, her fingers tracing the edges of the contract Graham had handed her. The pages were thick, professional, filled with language that felt foreign but promising. A partnership, a 50-50th split, control. But she knew better than to rush into something without understanding the full picture. Graham had offered her this opportunity, no strings attached. Or so he claimed, but nothing in the business world was ever as simple as it seemed. Her brother's words echoed in her mind, like a reminder of how far she had fallen. "You'll always be our servant." James had never respected her, never truly seen her potential. He had made it clear that the world would never allow her to step into the light. But that was before. This was now. Her opportunity with Graham was her chance to prove James and everyone else wrong. But she wasn't going to take it lying down. She wasn't going to let this man use her, like so many had before. She had been underestimated her whole life, but now she had the upper hand. If she was going to play in the corporate world, she needed to be smart, methodical. She needed a plan. Bailey began to draft her strategy, starting with the most important element: Graham Hafford. Graham had made it clear that he saw something in her. He respected her resilience, her ability to remain calm under pressure. But Bailey knew there had to be more to his interest in her. He wasn't just handing her power out of kindness. There was a reason he had chosen her over her brother James. And it wasn't just because she had vision. Bailey needed to figure out what Graham wanted from her, what leverage he had, and most importantly, what he was hiding. Every powerful man had his secrets. She knew that better than anyone. For the next few days, Bailey did what she did best. She observed. She paid attention to the smallest details, the way Graham ran his business, the people he surrounded himself with. She spent time reading between the lines of every meeting, every email. It was exhausting, but she had no other choice. She needed to know how to navigate this world, how to use Graham's weaknesses against him if she had to. But as Bailey dug deeper into the company, she discovered something that shook her to her core. Graham wasn't as clean as he appeared. Late one night, after her children had gone to bed, she sat in her dimly lit apartment, scrolling through emails and financial documents that had been left carelessly in the office. Among the papers was something she hadn't expected to see: a series of transactions linking Graham's company to shadowy, off-the-books dealings. Her heart raced as she connected the dots. There were large sums of money being funneled into untraceable accounts. There were questionable business dealings with people she recognized from her past, connections that had been tied to her father's downfall. Bailey froze. This wasn't just business. This was the same corrupt network that had destroyed her family. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Graham had positioned himself as her savior, but now she saw him for what he really was: a man using her to further his empire, feeding off the same corrupt practices that had caused her father's ruin. He wasn't offering her a partnership. He was using her as a pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. But Bailey wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not after everything she had been through. Not after how far she had come. She knew what she had to do. Her plan was simple. She would turn the tables on Graham. She would play him at his own game, use his own secrets, his own greed against him. She would expose him, dismantle his empire from the inside, and take control of the company herself. But she needed leverage, something Graham couldn't ignore. Bailey's mind raced as she pieced everything together. She could take everything he had: his wealth, his reputation, his power, but it wouldn't be enough to win. She had to make sure that he lost everything. Everything he had built, everything he thought was his, would come crashing down. For the first time, Bailey allowed herself to smile. It was a small, fleeting thing, but it was a smile that felt like victory. She wasn't just going to be the servant anymore. She was going to own this moment, own this empire. She would be the one in control. Bailey stood in the elevator of Hafford Enterprises, staring at her reflection in the polished steel. She wasn't the woman she had been a few weeks ago: timid, invisible, and resigned to the life others had decided for her. No, now she was someone different, someone powerful, someone who knew exactly what she wanted and was no longer afraid to take it. The doors slid open, and she stepped into the grand lobby of the building, feeling the weight of every step. The employees here, well-dressed, sharp-eyed, didn't know her story. They didn't know she had spent years working to stay afloat, while others coasted on privilege and wealth. And that, in itself, felt like power. She had nothing to prove to them. Her mind was laser-focused on the task ahead, confronting Graham Hafford and exposing everything she had discovered. She had the evidence, the transactions, the connections, the corruption. She had everything she needed to bring him down. But more than that, she had a burning sense of purpose, a drive that came from years of being underestimated. Bailey had already spent days meticulously preparing, aligning her strategy to ensure Graham wouldn't see it coming. She had contacted a journalist friend who had the clout to help her get her story out if it came down to it. She had set up the perfect moment for confrontation: when Graham would be alone, when his guard would be down. She had everything in place. She walked into Graham's office, the door swinging open before she could even knock. He was sitting behind his massive desk, as composed and cold as ever, flipping through papers. His office was immaculate: clean lines, expensive artwork, a sleek, modern aesthetic. But it wasn't the kind of office that made Bailey feel small anymore. It felt like a shell, a facade, hiding something darker beneath. "Bailey," Graham greeted her, his voice smooth, warm, but there was something calculating in his eyes. "I'm glad you could make it." "Thanks for having me," Bailey replied, her voice steady. She could feel the tension building in the pit of her stomach, but she didn't let it show. She had already made up her mind. "I've been thinking about your role in the company," he continued, leaning back in his chair. "You've been a great asset already. I think we're going to go far together." Bailey forced a smile, her heart pounding as she took a deep breath. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, the weight of what she was about to do settled heavily on her shoulders. "Actually, Graham," she said, her voice firm and calm, "I've been thinking about something too." He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "I've done a little research," she added, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. "I know about the money laundering, the shell companies, and the connections you've made with my father's old enemies. I know about the deals you've been making with people like Viktor Ivanov and your shady dealings in Moscow." Graham's eyes narrowed. For a moment, the mask slipped. The charming businessman, the polished image of power, faltered, but only for a split second. "Bailey, I think you've misunderstood something here," Graham said, his voice dripping with false calm. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Bailey shot back, her confidence growing with each word. "You used me. You saw me as a pawn in your little game, thinking I'd be too naive to see what you were up to. But I'm done being anyone's pawn. You thought you could use my family's past to get ahead, to manipulate me into being your perfect partner. But you were wrong." Graham stood, his tall frame towering over her, but there was something in his eyes now, something that was no longer confident or smug. He was realizing that she wasn't afraid of him anymore. "You think you can just come in here," and he began, but Bailey cut him off. "Actually," she said, stepping closer, "I don't just think. I know." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, documents, financial statements, and bank transfers that exposed the truth behind Graham's empire. She slapped it down on the desk in front of him. "Everything you've worked for is built on lies, on stolen money, and on the backs of people you've ruined." Graham's jaw tightened as he scanned the papers. His eyes flickered with something close to panic, but he quickly regained his composure. "Bailey, this is bigger than you think. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing," he said, his voice low and warning. Bailey took a step back, her resolve hardening. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You thought you could control me, that I'd be too scared to fight back. You were wrong. This is over, Graham." She pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice steady as she spoke. "This is Bailey Evans. I need you to get in touch with Sarah Harper at the FBI. I have all the evidence they need to take down Graham Hafford and his operations. It's time to bring this empire to the ground." Graham's face went white. The realization that he was no longer in control hit him like a wave. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was trapped. "I've been patient for a long time," Bailey said, her voice steady but filled with a fierce conviction. "But no more. This ends now." Bailey turned and walked out of the office, leaving Graham standing there, defeated. She could feel the weight of the moment, the magnitude of what she had just done. For so long, she had been the one in the background, the one who had been overlooked, the one who had been told she was nothing. But now, she was the one who held the power. She had taken control of her life, and no one, least of all her brother or Graham, could take that away from her. As she stepped into the elevator, the doors closing behind her, Bailey allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. She had done it. She had taken back her life, and no one would ever treat her as a servant again.